When people think of Superman, typically they think about him in the movies because just the types of stories that he lends himself to are more often pretty large in scale, but he has had kind of a history in TV shows, even in terms of live action. There were some TV shows with him in the 20th century, and in the 21st century we had the Smallville origin story series, and very recently we had the Superman and Lois series, which is the first time that they were really able to use 21st century technology to make a live action Superman show. So looking back on the first season, how well does it hold up? Before I hop into the review, keep in mind that this is all just my opinion. Share what you think about it in the comment section down below. And without any further ado, let's hop right into it. So while a lot of the Superman media actually takes place in his earlier years, this takes place later on in his life when he and Lois have kids that are teenagers. And parts of the show do take place in Metropolis, most notably at the beginning, but most of the show takes place in Smallville because that's where the family decides to move, and the real reason is probably just because that worked better for the budget. And while this does take place later in Superman's life, I do really appreciate how there are flashbacks that just kind of explore his origins. Now there is kind of a little bit of a multiverse thing going on in this show, which I feel like was a bit unnecessary, just because this kind of came out when a lot of superhero media started to really push the multiverse thing and there was a lot of crazy stuff going on. And what they do here really isn't anything too crazy, it's just where the character John Henry Irons travels to a different universe, and in his universe Superman turns evil. And it's not like it doesn't fit into the story very well, but it's just a case where I just feel like they kind of just could have worked it out to where he's from the main universe. And yes, they would have had to change the story because there wouldn't be an evil Superman, but it's obviously perfectly reasonable for people to think that Superman can't be trusted. A lot of that is kind of explored in this show. And another big thing with this season is that you have Morgan Edge coming into power, and it's revealed later on that he's actually Superman's Kryptonian half-brother. And there's a huge plot point with the uncovering of the ex-Krypton and all that great stuff, where people are getting tricked into having their conscious possessed by a Kryptonian conscious. And the story of having Krypton live on years after its destruction has been done before in other Superman media, but it is a little bit different in this scenario. But with all of this crazy stuff going on, how well are the character arcs done? First of all, this is a great version of Superman where you get to see him as a father figure, and of course just being Superman, always wanting to do the right thing. And even his Clark Kent personality I feel like is a little bit different, and him and Lois are definitely great in this show. The dynamic with them is pretty well done. And of course you get to see Lois as a reporter, and her father also plays a pretty big role into the series, and because he has this high position in the military, he's just concerned about a lot of stuff, and everything all these characters are doing in this show just ties together in a very nice way. As I mentioned, you have the villain trying to make Krypton live on, and you have John Henry Irons with the tragic backstory. And then of course the sons of Superman and Lois play a huge role into the story, where you have Jonathan, the stereotypical kid that thinks he's cool.
I'm cool.
And then of course there's Jordan, pretty much the stereotypical introverted kid that only likes to play video games. And then he winds up developing powers first. But the whole family dynamic is actually done very well, and pretty early on in the show you actually start to care about them. And it's just especially interesting because Superman had hid his identity from them up until the beginning of this show. And so there's just kind of a theme about trust going on throughout the show. And then of course Lana Lang and her family play a huge role into the show as well. And then of course her husband Kyle, who's like the stereotypical dad that's a police officer, except he's not a police officer, he's a firefighter. He somehow winds up being like the best character in the show for no reason. Now I will say the first half of this show is a little bit lighter on action than the second half. As it goes along it gets better, and obviously since this was more low budget there's not as many action scenes they can do compared to just scenes of people standing around and talking. But it felt like we got enough of it for what it is. It's always good, it's exciting, there's some good choreography. Now this series doesn't really overdo it on the CGI, but it's not necessarily great, especially for today's standards, and it's not really anything outrageous, it's just more so because of the show's low budget, and there's not really too many unique locations they filmed at. A lot of the places just look kind of generic, but you kind of expect that from a TV show like this. It's not going to be movie level quality because it doesn't have a movie level budget. I will say though, this does have some really good costume design when it comes to the Kryptonian costume. costumes, especially Superman's main costume. It might actually be his best outfit because it kind of does have that scale-like texture that the Henry Cavill suit had, but it doesn't pop out as much. I also think the Fortress of Solitude actually looks pretty great. It was a good design for what they were going for there, and I really do like the hologram of Jor-El. Now, you never really expect a TV show to have the quality of music that a movie does, and in terms of Superman, the only thing better than the John Williams or Hans Zimmer score is in fact the Smallville intro. But still, when it comes to this series, I do think it has an above average theme. Just what they do with the title card music, it's pretty memorable. And throughout the show, the background music, it's okay. It kind of captures the emotion of what's going on, but not anything too crazy. So all in all, this is a show that in many ways felt like it was going to be generic, and then it wound up impressing me. Because it's a CW show, it's obviously slow paced, because it's like 45-minute episodes with a low budget, so they can't shoot in that many locations. There's not as much stuff they can do with the CGI. And so really the only way a show like that can be good is if it has interesting characters that you can get invested in. And to simply put it, this series is successful at that. Maybe at some points it's a little bit too slow paced for my liking, but for what it's going for, it gets the job done. So overall, on the quality scale of 0 to 100, I'll give it an 81%, and I would definitely recommend it if you're a fan of Superman. As always, thank you guys so much for watching, and I'll see you guys in the next one.